Thanks to our friends at The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/ASYM for the top 10 stocks to buy right now. Virgin Galactic reported second quarter 2023 earnings after the market closed on Tuesday. I've gone through that, listened to the conference call. I think this is kind of business as usual, even though the stock is down a little bit in trading on Wednesday as I'm recording. My view is that Virgin Galactic is taking steps in the right direction. That doesn't necessarily mean the stock is going to go up near term, but if you're thinking about this as a long term, where's the company going in 5 to 10 years? I think we're starting to piece that together. And so I want to go through what the results looked like and what I liked and what I didn't about comments and presentations. My name is Travis William. Thanks for watching Asymmetric Investing. Please subscribe here on YouTube for all my content. And if you're interested in a deep dive on Virgin Galactic, I got a link to that in the show notes. It's on my newsletter, Asymmetric Investing. Let's just go through the presentation. I think that's the best place to start. And the company started with a lot of the highlights for the quarter. Unity 25 took off in May, successful flight there. And then obviously Galactic 1 late in the quarter. That was a research flight. That was something that management talked a lot about. About 10% of flights going forward are going to be research flights. Those will be a little bit higher revenue at about $600,000 per seat. So something to keep in mind for investors. And then obviously next week we have the flight window open up for Galactic 2. This is going to be the crew. The passengers up here are on the top. This is going to be the first commercial space flight. It's not a research flight. It's just kind of regular people flying into space. And then this is the crew from Virgin Galactic on the bottom. A highlight of the results are here, and the numbers are not all that compelling for the most part because there's so little revenue coming in. I think this is one of the funny things with reactions to the market is the stock will drop and it'll be because revenue was $2 million. And it's like, who cares? But the results were $2 million in revenue compared to $0.4 million a year ago. Management did say that revenue for the next 2 quarters would be about $1 million. That's because they're selling those low cost seats that were reserved years ago when prices for tickets were $200,000, $250,000. So that's something management talked about quite a bit on the conference call, that at least in the near term, the revenue per flight is not going to be nearly what it will be likely in the future when tickets are $450,000 or more per ticket. But that was one of the reasons that the stock fell, was that the guidance was a little bit weak. But again, you're talking about a company that's going to generate a couple of $1 million in revenue and burn hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think it really matters whether revenue was $1 million or $2 million in a quarter. Operating expenses, $141 million. That did include things like stock-based compensation. So free cash flow, which is something I'm keeping an eye on, negative $135 million. That was actually a slight improvement from the first quarter, but down from a loss of negative $91 million in the year ago period. This is the other thing that I was keeping an eye on, is how much stock was actually sold in the quarter. We found out late in the quarter that they completed a share sale authorization and then started a new $400 million authorization. So raised $241 million, the issuance of stock. Given the number of shares that they said they sold there, 55 million shares, that means they got a price of about $4.38 per share, above where we're trading today. So looks like management was pretty optimistic with the bump in the share price in June and early July. So that's good to see that they're raising money opportunistically. And this is what the cash and equivalents looks like at the end of the quarter. Again, Virgin Galactic has a few years of negative cash flow ahead. They're going to have to build out their Delta spacecraft. Those are going to be $50 to $60 million a piece, are not going to even enter service until 2026. So you got to get to that point. You got to get to the point where you may get to positive free cash flow. I've estimated that it's going to be about $2 billion in cash burned between now and then. So there's now $1 billion in cash on the balance sheet after the most recent raise. Management is going to have to go back to the market again to raise cash. So do they do that? We know that there is more in the authorization for current stock sales. So there may be a few $100 million more. It looks like management wants to keep the cash balance at about that $1 billion mark. So that would be good to see, but just expect that there's going to be more stock sales, maybe even eventually debt sales as we get closer to final commercial launch of the Delta spacecraft. Financial outlook. This is again what I was talking about earlier, approximately $1 million in revenue. That was what a lot of investors were disappointed by, but as somebody who is planning on holding this stock for the next 5 to 10 years, I don't really think it matters. Cash flow guidance. This is actually a little better than I thought it was going to be. negative 120 to negative 130 million dollars. That means that you're looking at a run rate of about $500 million per year. So again, we look at that cash balance. That's nearly 2 years worth of cash. Pretty good amount of cash for Virgin Galactic. So some of that spending will ramp up as we start to actually build the Delta spacecraft, update the mothership. That'll be happening later on. But for now, I was happy to see this number come in under 140, under $150 million. There was a lot of talk on the conference call about where resources are being allocated, who is working on what. And I think the real challenge for Virgin Galactic right now is they're limited on how much money they can spend, how many people are working on these spacecraft and aircraft. And so they're really trying to optimize where that money is being spent. The Imagine spacecraft, that's the one that is silver, that's already been built. It appears that that is basically just going to be a test spacecraft, may never actually make it into space, because management has said they're focusing on working on the Delta spacecraft. That's the next generation spacecraft. It will also have 6 seats, just like Imagine did. So a little bit of a reconfiguration. They said they learned from the development of that spacecraft. But do you want to sink money into that existing spacecraft just to try to get it off the ground in a couple of years? Or do you want to prioritize putting that engineering talent to the Delta spacecraft? We've seen over the last couple of years that management has really decided to take the long-term view. I think that's the right thing to do, but investors may not like that from a short-term perspective. So just be aware of that it appears that the Imagine spacecraft is probably not going to be generating any revenue. We're just going to have Unity until 2026, when the Delta line of spacecraft should be starting to actually take commercial operations. The testing for that spacecraft will be in 2025. So a lot of the build out will be next year. And then again, on a resource front, those engineers that are working on the Delta spacecraft, once they're completed with some of that work, they're going to be moving to updating the mothership. That's going to be the next step. And the idea there would be is you develop those 2 aircraft. Now you're able to just make more of them. So there's not going to be just one Delta spacecraft. There's hopefully going to be a dozen or more. That's the way that Virgin Galactic is actually going to get to positive free cash flow, is by having a lot of these spacecraft and doing a flight every day or more. But we're a long ways from that. And so management was really answering a lot of questions about where is the money being spent, what's being prioritized, and what's not. If you're a shareholder, I think you have to take a long-term view. You have to take a view of owning this company into 2030, when commercial operations are really going on a regular basis. They're not taking monthly flights, they're taking daily flights. And at that point, you'd be talking about billions of dollars worth of revenue. Again, on that revenue front, a lot of the upcoming revenue is going to be seats that were sold years ago for $200,000 to $250,000. Then you get to the $450,000 range. Then management said that there will be an update to ticket prices coming out maybe later this year or next year, but not below that $450,000 number. So again, the number of seats going into space is going to go up. The price of each seat is going to go up. That means revenue is eventually going to go up. But we got a long runway here. We got until 2026 before Delta spacecraft even get off the ground. There's a long way to go before that. So the stock may be extremely volatile. I wouldn't be surprised to see shares drop or rise significantly on any given news. But what we'd like to see as investors is these monthly flights go off without a hitch, and then development continue to go forward without delays on the Delta spacecraft. Hopefully, management has learned from past mistakes that delays at this point is not going to be welcome from the market. So they've really got to keep expectations in the right place for Delta and when they're going to get off the ground. So if you've been following this company for a long time, you know that it's kind of up and down, but I don't think there was major changes after the second quarter. We just got some clarification on things like revenue, where spending is going, when aircraft and spacecraft are going to be updated. But again, 2026 is going to be the year. Delta should be done by then. Unfortunately, that's 3 years away. So that's a long time for investors to wait. Those are my thoughts on the results, but what do you think? Leave your comments in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to Asymmetric Investing. And thanks for watching, everybody. See you here next time.